Just days after warning that Europe could die, French President Emmanuel Macron said the country's nuclear arms should be part of a common EU defense strategy. Macron's comments drew criticism from his political opponents ahead of the EU elections set for June. Since Moscow launched its attack on Ukraine in 2022, the French leader has warned that Europe faces an existential threat from Russian aggression and that it cannot always depend on the US. In a recent speech at Sorbonne University, Macron called for more assertive European Union on the global stage. He said EU countries should prioritise buying European arms, seek closer defence ties with post-Brexit Britain, and boost the continent's cybersecurity capacity. The French president also added that Europe should not become a vassal of the US and should go beyond the protection already offered by NATO. In the aftermath of Russia's attack on Ukraine, the EU has also been trying to promote self-sufficiency in energy. While it's managed to dramatically reduce the amount of Russian gas exports, a sizable amount is still making its way into the bloc. And now to discuss the French president's warning for Europe, joining me now from Istanbul is Aylin Ünver-Noy. She is a professor at Haliç University. And from Ankara, Şuay Nilhan Açıkalın. She is an associate professor at Hacı Bayram Veli University. Ladies, welcome to Straight Talk. It's good to have you on the program. So, Aylin, in a recent speech, Macron warned that Europe is mortal and can die, and that the European Union needs to boost its security independence in the face of global crisis. What do you make of it? I mean, is this a similar warning when he said a few years ago about NATO?
Yes, we can say that it's similar because when he said that the brain that of NATO realized, he mentioned about the U.S. withdrawal from the Afghanistan without informing the EU member states allies. And always France has some skeptical about the U.S. commitment to protect the European allies. Previously and historically, Pleven Plan, Fouché Plan were some of the examples of France initiatives in defense integration for the European Union. And so this skepticism raised with the Trump administration some expectations about the defense expenditures from its EU allies and some criticism to them. And also the war in Ukraine also accelerated this process to have a strategic autonomy in the European continent. Mm-hmm. And of course, the problem in self-sufficiency in the European defense sector also become more visible. And that also the final factor that also speed up this process. And Macron's statement should be read from this perspective because the emerging environment is too risky and more the geopolitical rivalry became more visible.
Yes, so sure. He also said he's willing to discuss using French nuclear warheads as part of a credible European defense against threats from Russia. So is the EU taking the French president upon his offer? And where does this leave NATO, which is about to elect its next chief?
Well, I don't think so. The EU or NATO will take the stance of the French in this position because most of the time, as we witnessed, the NATO used the nuclear concepts as a mostly the leverage concept against Russia or other threats that's defined by the NATO in last summit. I think the French leader Macron tried to show much more assertive position regarding the French position as a leading position within the EU security as well as the NATO. But it's not easy to play under the shadow of the Russian-Ukrainian war with the very uncertainty and unpredictable dynamics that easily change in a different manner.
So, Aylin, Turkey backs the candidacy of Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte to be NATO's next Secretary General. How important is this, and what kind of challenges he'll be facing if he gets elected?
Actually, as you know, that Dutch Prime Minister Rutte already has support from many countries like the US, UK, Germany, and lately from Turkey. And He's one of the candidates who can work with the president, whoever wins the White House in the next November election. So this was an important thing that the NATO member states take into consideration. And also, there are other issues like his statement about the Turkey. He is very aware of importance of Turkey in NATOs, as a NATO member, and especially its southern flank. It's stated very clearly in his visit to Turkey. So that's why his position as a NATO General Secretary is important, and it's also the Netherlands is one of the countries known as the Atlanticist among the other EU member states when we compare it with the other states. So that's why his position to become the candidate, the next General Secretary of the NATO seems more possible under the current circumstances.
So, Shuai, what were the initial response from within the European Union to Macron's speech in which he said Europe should show it is not the vessel of the US?
Well, we saw that kind of the speech or that kind of rhetoric from the Macron in previous years ago before the war started. But in this last circumstances, it's obvious that, for example, Germany is one of the also biggest country in the EU and is a considered engine of the European integration, seems to be a little hesitant to respond or enjoy the perception or approach of the French, as we saw before as well. And I think also some other countries like the Poland, Hungary, those countries have also some very different and completely different approach and the perception both with the Macron and the Brussels as well. And most of the countries until now seems to be a little bit reluctant to enjoy the position of Macron, because they both know that Macron time to time playing those cards to be pretend like the leader of the Europe, especially after the Chancellor Merkel.
So, Alim, what do you think? Could Europe easily decouple from the US?
I don't think so, because even at the war in Ukraine, when the Ukraine suffers from the ammunition shortages, the EU was not so able to deliver the needed the ammunition, artillery shells on time and demanded amount to Ukraine. So this self-sufficiency problem in the European Union member states seen very well. That's why they announced the European defense industry strategy recently. So they're not ready for a war, and also the France arguments for an independent EU defense integration seems okay, but it takes time. And as you know, that for a long time, the European Union member states described as the free rider by the United States administrations, beginning from the Obama administration up to now. And so that's why this defense integration strategies just help the EU to meet the demands of the NATOs from the EU members to meet the 2% GDP targets in terms of defense expenditures.
So, Shuai, what's the current shape of China-Europe relations? Because we know Chinese President Xi Jinping will be visiting France, Serbia, and Hungary from May 5th to 10th. So what do you make of his European tour, which comes after an absence of 5 years? And why do you think the Chinese leader have chosen these countries to visit?
Well, the biggest determinant is obviously economy. When it comes to the China and the European countries' relations, we know that the China has a lots of and very big investments across the Europe, from Italy to Serbia, as you mentioned. And I think, especially after the war, the position of China seems to be close to the Russia, but we never see the China in a very hard approach or very tough approach regarding the EU or the United States in terms of the geopolitical conflicts. So this respect, the last visits of the Xi Jinping should be mostly focus on the economy, energy sector are the first priorities of the agenda between the mutual relations. But I think it's also interesting to see what the European Union mentioned in the last strategic compass in last year that they drafted after the war, because normally in the previous year, EU drafted strategic compass. It's also included China as a threat for European security, but this time it was a different. They just focus on the Russian side, and they seems as if there would be a channel to increasing the positive relations with the China. So most visits will focus on the economy and energy, and I think we saw a new agreements can be signed between those countries and the China. Especially, we already know that the Serbia and Hungary has lots of the common agreement in last 3 years regarding the energy sector.
So, Aylin, what's the French and the EU position when it comes to tensions between China and the US?
As far as I know from the Macron's statements, that they don't want to be in the position to be between the confrontation between the China and the United States over Taiwan. And also the French President Macron also wants to China to take position to put a pressure on Vladimir Putin, Russia, to stop the war in Ukraine. So this is another expectations they expect from for the European Union security, and besides the economic issue. So the other issue is also related to this visit of Xi Jinping, is that some Chinese companies, because of their ties with Russia, they were blacklisted in the European Union member states. So this will be another issue that will be discussed at this visit in Europe. So all related to the economic, energy, and the security issues are interrelated and will be discussed at this meeting.
So, Shuai, one last question. What kind of legacy does the French President Emmanuel Macron want to leave behind? I mean, is he stoking tensions between Russia and Europe for his political future?
Well, if you look over the previous years, since the President Macron became the president of the France, unfortunately, his foreign affairs initiatives mostly considered as a fail. He tried to be assertive in the East Mediterranean during the COVID-19, later on the different regional issues. And lastly, as we remember, he planning to and partially plan to send troops to Ukraine. But until now, it seems a little bit his legacy turns to be a kind of foreign policy failure time to time to try to make the French in a leading position. And unfortunately, that kind of attempt during these very uncertainty and unpredictable times, taking the risk of the French and the France within the European Union and also North Atlantic Treaty.
All right, ladies, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk.